I saw my husband in the garden with my son's fiancée just moments before she was to walk down the aisle. I was about to scream, but a hand on my shoulder stopped me. It was my son, Thomas. His expression was utterly grim. He leaned in and whispered, "Mom, I know, but it's so much worse than just the affair." "Hello, my dears. I'm so glad you could join me today. Before I begin, I'd be so grateful if you'd let me know what part of the world you're watching from in the comments. It warms my heart to see where everyone is. Now let me tell you what happened. On the morning of my son's wedding, I was up before the sun at 4:30. Sleep was impossible. I told myself it was just the excitement any mother would feel, but a cold knot of dread was tied in my stomach. I sat right here in my little study, surrounded by books, pretending to answer emails. I'm a retired librarian, you see. My life has always been about order, quiet, and the comfort of stories. It's a peaceful life, and it allowed us to support our son, Thomas, through medical school, alongside my husband Richard's salary. Richard, a respected history professor, was always the more vibrant one. The numbers and words on my screen were just a jumble. My thoughts were outside, on the beautiful lawn of our Charleston, South Carolina home. I could picture it all perfectly. The rows of white chairs, the floral archway I'd spent weeks fussing over with our gardener, ensuring every climbing jasmine was perfect. I had tested the fairy lights myself, not once, but twice. Everything had to be flawless for Thomas. He deserved a day without a single shadow. 30 years of marriage to Richard, 26 years of raising our wonderful son. My life's work was this family. I was the planner, the quiet constant, the one who made sure life ran smoothly behind the scenes. Richard was the star, the brilliant academic with a charming smile that captivated everyone. I was the sturdy bookshelf he organized his life on, and for years, that was more than enough for me. But a change had settled in our home over the past year. A quiet chill. It was in the way he'd end a phone call abruptly when I entered the room. The way he started locking his study door, something he'd never done in 3 decades. When I'd ask if everything was all right, he'd give me that easy, dismissive smile. "Just university politics, Margaret," he'd say. "Trying to secure a new grant." I wanted to believe him. How do you question a foundation you've built your entire life on? You don't just throw away 30 years of shared memories over a bad feeling. The soft creak of the study door pulled me from my thoughts. It was Thomas, already in his pajama bottoms, holding a cup of tea. He looked utterly drained, with dark smudges under his eyes that hadn't been there a week ago. He has my calm demeanor but his father's sharp, intelligent features. "Mom, you're already up," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion. "The ceremony isn't for hours." "Just making sure every detail is perfect for my boy," I replied, forcing a bright smile as I shut my laptop. "Is your father still asleep?" "He went out early," Thomas said, a strange tension in his voice. He came and perched on the corner of my desk, suddenly looking like a little boy again. "Said he needed to pick up a last-minute wedding gift for Isabella's parents, the Vanderbilts." I frowned. That was the first I'd heard of it. "Mom," he began, his eyes fixed on his tea, "can I ask you something?" I swiveled my chair to face him. In the soft morning light, his anxiety was a palpable thing. "Anything, sweetheart. What is it?" He took a long, shaky breath. "Do you think Isabella is happy with me?" The question was a physical blow. Isabella, his fiancée, an art gallery curator, so poised, so beautiful, from one of Charleston's oldest and wealthiest families. She seemed to be everything we could have hoped for Thomas. But I couldn't deny my own private reservations. I'd seen the way her gaze would flicker to her phone when Thomas spoke about his long hours at the hospital, how her smile never quite seemed to reach her eyes during our family dinners. "Thomas, darling, why would you even ask that? Today is your wedding day." I know. Maybe it's just nerves," he muttered, not looking at me. "But there are times when she looks at me, and I feel like I'm not really there. Like I'm just a part of the beautiful picture she's painting for her life." He paused, his knuckles white around the mug. "And she spends so much time with Dad. They're always talking about art, history, investments. She says he's like a second father to her." I wanted to tell him that I had noticed it too. The way Richard's attention zeroed in on Isabella the moment she walked into a room. How he'd always be the first to leap up to refresh her wine. How he knew her favorite obscure artist. A detail he'd surely forget if it were me who mentioned it. Instead, I reached out and put my hand on his. Every couple gets wedding day jitters, sweetie. It's a huge commitment. It feels like more than jitters, Mom, he said, his voice cracking. He finally met my gaze, and the raw hurt in his eyes was a terrifying sight. I think she's in love with someone else. My blood ran cold. What on earth makes you think that? It's just little things, he whispered. The way her entire face lights up when Dad enters the room. How she always asks for his opinion on everything before mine. Yesterday, I saw them in the rose garden, just talking, and the way he was looking at her, it wasn't how a man should look at his future daughter-in-law. I felt a hot flush creep up my neck. I tried to keep my voice even. Thomas, that's an incredibly serious thing to suggest. I know, he said, his shoulders slumping, and I pray I'm wrong. Believe me, I pray I'm wrong. Before I could find the words to comfort him, the door opened again. It was Richard. He was already perfectly dressed in tailored trousers and a crisp linen shirt, looking every bit the distinguished professor. There they are, my two favorite people, he boomed, though his smile seemed strained. He looked surprised to find Thomas in my study. Big day, son. Shouldn't you be getting some rest? He then turned to me. And you, Margaret, my love, you'll run yourself ragged. Isabella just called me. She's going to stop by around 11 to go over some last-minute details about the seating chart. I saw Thomas's jaw clench. What details? He asked. Oh, you know, Richard said with a casual flick of his hand. Just ensuring her parents aren't too close to your Aunt Carol after that political discussion at Easter. We have to be diplomatic, son. It's best we handle it, just the three of us. Of course, Thomas said, his voice void of emotion. Can't have any unpleasantness. The air in the room was so heavy I could barely breathe. As I watched my husband and my son, a terrible certainty bloomed in my heart. Thomas wasn't wrong. Something was deeply, horribly wrong. After they both left my study, a chilling fear took hold of me. I was scheduled for a final confirmation call with the florist at 11:30, a call I'd had on my calendar for a month. I picked up my phone, my hand shaking, and dialed her number. I told her a small family issue had come up and I needed to push the call. It wasn't a complete lie. The truth was, I had intentionally cleared my schedule. The echo of Thomas's words, combined with the sickening feeling Richard's fake joviality had stirred, made it impossible to focus on anything else. Something was going to happen in my home today, and for the first time in my 30-year marriage, I was going to find out what it was. For the next few hours, I drifted through my house like a ghost, pretending to be busy. I refolded napkins that were already perfectly folded. I adjusted the floral arrangements on the mantelpiece. Every creak of the floorboards made my stomach lurch. Every car that drove past sent my heart into a frantic rhythm. I was an actress playing the part of the blissful mother of the groom, while my insides were churning with a dreadful anxiety. At precisely 11 foul, a gleaming silver Mercedes, Isabella's car, purred into our driveway. I watched from the living room window as she got out. Even in a simple summer dress, she looked like she had stepped out of a high-fashion magazine. She approached our front door with the easy grace of someone who never had to question her place in the world. My heart pounded so loudly it was a drumbeat in my ears. I slipped out the back door and made my way around the side of the house, ducking behind the thick camellia bushes that lined the windows of Richard's study. I felt utterly ridiculous, a trespasser in my own life. But the desperate need to either confirm my worst fears or put them to rest was a physical force. Through the large window, I could see them. Richard had let her in, and they were standing near his large oak desk, the place where he had graded thousands of papers and written 2 books. He was pouring her a glass of sherry. I couldn't make out their words, but their body language was a language I understood all too well. They were standing close. Far too close. His hand was on the small of her back. It was a gesture that could almost be dismissed as paternal, but it rested there a moment too long, his fingers gently stroking the fabric of her dress. I balled my hands into fists, my fingernails pressing hard into my palms. For 30 years, we had built a life in this house. We had raised Thomas in these rooms. We had hosted countless holidays and celebrations right here. And now, my husband was standing there, intimately touching another woman, my son's bride, on the very day she was to marry my son. I was about to stand, to march in there and unleash a storm of fury. I didn't care about the wedding, about the guests, about the scene. All I cared about was the searing betrayal that was unfolding before my eyes. But a flicker of movement in the reflection on the glass stopped me. I peered closer. It was Thomas. He was standing at the top of the main staircase, concealed by the shadows of the upper landing, watching them too. The sight of him, so still and so utterly broken, froze me in place. This wasn't just my heartbreak, it was his, and it was so much worse. Down in the study, their intimacy had deepened. Isabella's hand was now on Richard's chest. She leaned toward him, her head tilted up, a coy smile on her lips. She said something, and he threw his head back and laughed. It was a genuine, unrestrained sound I hadn't heard from him in years. The way he used to laugh with me, back when we were young, and the future was a beautiful, unwritten book. In that instant, I saw my husband become a stranger. Someone vibrant and alive in a way he hadn't been with me for a very, very long time. Then his hands were in her hair, and he was kissing her. It wasn't a fleeting peck on the lips. It was a deep, hungry kiss, filled with a passion I thought had died years ago. My vision blurred with rage. A roaring sound filled my ears. I took a step toward the house, ready to tear the door off its hinges, to scream until my voice was gone. And then a firm hand gripped my arm. I whipped around, my heart seizing in my chest. It was Thomas. He had slipped out of the house to join me. His face was a pale, ashen mask, but his eyes were burning with a cold, hard light I had never seen in him. "Mom, don't," he whispered, his voice tight with strain. "Not yet." "Thomas, this is—" I choked, unable to form the words. "I know what it is," he said, his voice unnervingly steady, though I could see his hand was trembling. "Mom, I've known for months." Months. The word was a faint, strangled sound. I stared at my son, the kind, gentle boy I had raised, who was now looking at me with the eyes of a man who had been aged a decade in a matter of moments. We were still crouched behind the camellias. The beautiful flowers I'd nurtured were now our hiding place as we watched our family implode. Inside, my husband and my son's fiancé had moved from the desk to the leather armchair. I couldn't bring myself to look anymore. "I didn't want to believe it," Thomas said, his voice low and intense. "I kept telling myself I was crazy. He's just being a supportive father-in-law. She's just excited to be joining the family. But it just kept getting more obvious. The secret phone calls, the chance meetings for coffee, the way her eyes followed him and only him." He corrected himself, a slip of the tongue that was a painful stab to the heart. "I mean, Isabella, she was supposed to be my wife." "Why didn't you say anything to me?" I asked, my voice trembling with a cocktail of shock and a fierce, protective anger. "You shouldn't have been dealing with this by yourself." "Because I needed to be sure," he said, his jaw tight. "And because," he looked at me, his gaze far older than his 26 years, "I wanted to give them enough rope to hang themselves." He pulled out his phone. His hands were shaking as he swiped the screen. "I hired someone, Mom." "You what?" "I'm not an idiot," he said. "After I saw them at a cafe downtown 2 months ago, a meeting Dad told me was with a university donor, and she told me was a dress fitting. I knew I wasn't imagining things. I had to know for sure." He passed me the phone. "I hired a private investigator." My breath caught in my throat. "A PI? Thomas? The expense?" "Don't worry about the money," he said, his voice grim. "It was worth every penny." The first picture on the screen was of Richard and Isabella walking into a boutique hotel on the outskirts of Charleston. The date stamp showed it was from 6 weeks prior, on a Thursday afternoon, when Richard was supposedly at a faculty conference. The next photo was of them leaving 3 hours later, their hair mussed, their expressions flushed. "There are more than a dozen different dates," Thomas said flatly, as I scrolled through a gallery of their deceit. Pictures of them in dark corners of expensive restaurants. Pictures of them embracing next to Richard's car in a secluded parking garage. Pictures of them laughing, holding hands, living a whole other life in the shadows of our own. I felt a wave of nausea. The sheer scale of the betrayal was staggering. This wasn't a moment of weakness. This was a planned, sustained campaign of deceit. I started to stand up again, a fresh surge of rage boiling in my veins. "We are stopping this wedding," I said, my voice like ice. "Right now." "No." Thomas's voice was so sharp it made me drop back down. "Mom, you have to trust me. I have a plan." "A plan? Thomas, this is madness. We can't let them—" "We absolutely can," he cut in, his voice filled with a new, hard authority. "And we are going to. Mom, think. If we burst in there now, what happens? They'll lie. They'll deny everything. Dad will say you're being emotional, that you're misreading the situation. Isabella will burst into tears and play the innocent victim. They will find a way to make us look like the crazy ones." He was right. I could already picture it. Richard's calm, condescending tone. "Margaret, you're being hysterical. She's a nervous young bride, and I was simply offering some fatherly reassurance." "So what's your plan?" I whispered, my anger cooling into a terrifying, clear-eyed focus. Thomas's smile was a chilling alien thing on his handsome face. "Public exposure," he said, the words hanging like poison in the sweet-scented air. "Complete and total annihilation of their reputations. And legal trouble. We don't just expose this, Mom. We make sure they can never, ever recover." I looked at my son. When had my gentle boy become so ruthless, so cold? Then I glanced back through the window. I saw my husband, the man I had loved and trusted for 30 years, begin to unbutton Isabella's dress as she sat on his lap in the chair where he was supposed to find wisdom and inspiration. And I knew in that moment that the woman I used to be, the forgiving, understanding, quiet wife, was gone. She had died there in the soil, hidden behind the flowers I had so lovingly planted. "Tell me the plan," I said. That evening was the most surreal of my entire life. Richard came to dinner as if nothing was wrong, asking about the final arrangements for the music. Isabella had left hours earlier, and he was the perfect image of the doting husband and proud father. He practiced a few lines of his reception speech, talking about how proud he was of Thomas. The hypocrisy was a physical weight in the room, making it hard to breathe. I just smiled and nodded, a hollowed-out version of myself, while a silent scream echoed in my mind. After Richard was asleep, Thomas and I met in my study. We locked the door and drew the blinds. It felt like a command center for a war, which, in a way, it was. On my desk lay the evidence that would shatter 2 families. "Tell me about this PI," I said, staring at a surveillance photo that made my stomach clench. "His name is David," Thomas said. "David Chen. He's a friend of a friend from college. Ex-police, now runs his own firm. Very discreet." Thomas looked at me, a little shamefaced. "He's also the one who helped Dad's colleague, Professor Albright, through his messy divorce last year. I knew he was familiar with Dad's circle." I let out a dry, humorless laugh that was closer to a sob. Of course. "I'll call him," I said, my voice strained. David answered on the first ring. "Mrs. Miller. I was expecting your call. I'm sorry for the circumstances." "Thomas told me what you found," I said, getting straight to the point. "What else is there?" "More than you want to know," he said, his voice all business. "I've been on them for 2 months. They meet at least twice a week at the Palmetto Inn. He always pays cash for the room. He's bought her jewelry, taken her on a weekend trip to Savannah. He told you it was a history symposium." The rage flared again. Our money. The money I had so carefully budgeted and saved. The money that was supposed to be for our golden years, our future together. "And Mrs. Miller," David's voice softened slightly. "There's something else. Something much bigger. I started digging into your husband's finances, trying to see where this cash was coming from. He's been careless." "What did you find?" I asked, a new layer of dread coating my heart. There was a beat of silence on the other end. "It's not just Isabella," he said, his voice heavy. "He has a gambling problem, a big one. I found regular large payments going back over a decade to various online betting sites and a few less than reputable local bookies." The words didn't make sense. Richard? A gambler? He was so meticulous, so controlled. He's been hiding it for at least 15 years, David continued. The secret trips, the bad investments he told you about a few years ago that lost money. It was all to cover his losses. He's in debt, Mrs. Miller. Serious debt. Over $200,000. The phone felt like a block of ice in my hand. I couldn't breathe. 15 years of lies. A secret life built on risk and deceit, the emotional distance, the financial secrecy. It all snapped into a sickening new focus. I have to be sure, David, I whispered. I know, he said. I have bank records, testimony from a source. It's all ironclad. But Margaret, you need to prepare yourself. When this comes out, it's going to be a bombshell. I know, I said, my voice turning cold and hard. That's exactly what I'm counting on. The 24 hours before the wedding were a masterclass in deception. I moved through the final preparations like an automaton, my body performing the necessary tasks while my mind was a whirlwind of strategy and pain. I greeted arriving relatives with a smile. I calmly discussed table arrangements with the wedding coordinator. I even helped Richard choose his tie, my fingers touching the smooth silk as I had a fleeting dark fantasy of pulling it tight. Every polite word was a lie, every smile a mask. David worked with incredible speed. This was personal for him now, too. He despised seeing people like Richard ruin their families. He explained that getting hard proof of the art fraud would be trickier and would require a real investigation. But he had a witness. Isabella's former assistant at the gallery, he explained over the phone. She quit a month ago because she suspected something was wrong. She's willing to talk to the police, but only if she's guaranteed immunity. The day of the wedding, as florists and photographers swirled around the house in a chaotic ballet, David called again. We have more on the money, he said, his voice grim. It's worse. We met in my car at the end of our long driveway, the only place I felt safe from prying eyes. He opened his laptop and showed me a spreadsheet. I did a deep dive on all your assets, he said, pointing to a column of figures. He hasn't just been losing his own salary. For the last 5 years, he's been systematically draining your joint retirement account. Small transfers at first, then bigger and bigger. That's not possible, I said, stunned. That account requires 2 signatures for any withdrawal over $1,000. He forged your signature, David said quietly. I had a forensic analyst compare the signatures on the withdrawal slips to your signature on other bank documents. It's a very good forgery, but it's not yours. A wave of dizziness washed over me. This was more than infidelity. This was grand theft. He wasn't just breaking my heart. He was actively stealing our future, piece by piece, to feed his addiction. He was robbing me of the secure retirement I had worked my entire life to build. And Isabella? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. What's her part in this? She's not just a mistress, David said, his expression hardening. She's an accomplice. I found evidence that she has been using the gallery as a front to sell forgeries. She finds wealthy, unsuspecting buyers, like your husband, and sells them fakes, pocketing the difference. She convinced Richard to invest a huge chunk of the money he stole from you into a supposedly rare painting. The painting is a worthless copy. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. She wasn't just sleeping with him. She was fleecing him, using his foolish infatuation and his stolen money to fund her own crimes. My brilliant intellectual husband was being played by a woman young enough to be his daughter. And it gets worse, David said. Some of the money he's lost, it wasn't to bookies, it was to the Vanderbilts. Isabella's family? Her father, specifically. It seems Mr. Vanderbilt has been enabling Richard's gambling for years, acting as his personal bookie, extending him lines of credit. He's been holding the debt over your husband's head. Why? Leverage, David said simply. This marriage isn't just a social merger. It's a bailout. The Vanderbilts were going to quietly forgive Richard's debt once Isabella was officially married to your son. Your family's good name and your son's career were the price for Richard's sins. I rested my head against the steering wheel, the cool leather a small comfort against my burning skin. I didn't cry. I was far beyond tears. A strange and terrible calm settled over me. The pain was still a gaping wound, but it was now surrounded by a wall of ice-cold resolve. He wasn't just going to lose a wife, he was going to lose everything. The plan was no longer just about exposing an affair, it was about exposing a criminal conspiracy. The final hours ticked by in a haze of surreal calm. I went back to the house and resumed my duties as mother of the groom. I felt utterly detached, like I was watching a film of someone else's life. I saw myself laughing with guests, admiring dresses, and ensuring everything was perfect. Inside, I was a tightly wound spring of grief and fury, but on the surface, I was the very picture of maternal joy. Richard was in his glory, a gracious host accepting congratulations with his easy, confident smile. He pulled me close at one point, his arm sliding around my waist. "You look stunning, Margaret," he murmured in my ear. "A perfect day, isn't it?" I met his eyes, the eyes of the man I had given my life to, and felt nothing but a vast, cold emptiness. "Perfect," I smiled back. Thomas was my mirror image. He greeted his groomsmen, posed for pictures, and played the role of the happy groom flawlessly. But whenever his gaze met mine across the bustling lawn, I saw the same unwavering resolve. We were soldiers, waiting for the signal. The plan was devastatingly simple. David had arrived earlier, posing as a technician for the sound system. His equipment was discreetly placed. He had linked his laptop to the large projection screen that was meant to display a slideshow of Thomas and Isabella's courtship photos. No one had a clue. He had a small remote in his pocket. At the right moment, all he had to do was press a button. I had my own part to play. The divorce papers had been drawn up by my lawyer 2 days ago. They were signed, notarized, and sealed in an envelope inside my clutch. I also had a USB drive with copies of every piece of evidence David had gathered. My marriage was ending today, one way or another. At 4:05, I took my seat in the front row. The string quartet began to play, and the wedding party processed down the aisle. Richard sat beside me and took my hand, squeezing it with what anyone would assume was genuine affection. I fought the urge to recoil. Then, Isabella appeared at the end of the aisle, a vision in white silk, looking radiant, beautiful, and utterly corrupt. She smiled at the assembled guests. Then her eyes met Richard's. For one brief, unguarded moment, a look passed between them, a look of shared secrets and imminent victory. They thought they had won. They thought they were moments away from securing their perfect, fraudulent future. Thomas stood at the altar, his face a stoic mask. When Isabella joined him, he took her hand, his expression never changing. He glanced out at the guests, his eyes finding mine. He gave one single, almost imperceptible nod. It was time. The officiant began with the traditional words about love, honor, and fidelity. The hypocrisy was so thick it was almost suffocating. I wondered if they were even listening, or if they were already planning their next deception. The vows were exchanged, empty promises they had already shattered 1,000 times over. My stomach was a knot of ice. Finally, the officiant smiled warmly. "If anyone present has just cause for why these two should not be joined in matrimony, speak now or forever hold your peace." A hush fell over the 300 guests. This was it. My heart pounded against my ribs. I could feel the weight of every gaze. I took one slow, deliberate breath. Then, I stood up. The moment I was on my feet, a collective gasp rippled through the guests. The gentle afternoon air, filled with music and the scent of jasmine, suddenly went still and heavy. Every head turned in my direction. I could feel their confusion, their shock, their morbid curiosity. Beside me, Richard went stiff. "Margaret, what in God's name are you doing?" he hissed, his hand clamping down on my arm. "Sit down. You're making a scene." I pulled my arm from his grasp as if he had burned me. I looked past him, my gaze landing on my son, Thomas, who stood at the altar, his expression grim but steady. He was ready. Then I looked at Isabella, whose perfect bridal smile was now frozen in a mask of bewildered panic. "My apologies, everyone," I said, my voice ringing out, clear and firm, across the silent lawn. "I am so sorry for this interruption, but the officiant did ask if there was any reason this marriage should not go forward." I paused, letting the words hang in the air. "And as it happens, I do." A wave of frantic whispers broke out. I saw Isabella's father, Mr. Vanderbilt, start to rise from his seat, his face a thundercloud of indignation. "Mrs. Miller, what is the meaning of this?" he boomed. "The meaning, Mr. Vanderbilt," I said, turning to face him directly, "is that this marriage is a business transaction built on a foundation of theft, lies, and deceit, and I think everyone here deserves to know the real story." I reached into my clutch and pulled out the small remote David had given me. My thumb rested on the single button. "The truth?" Richard spluttered, his face turning a blotchy red. "Margaret, you're having a breakdown. You're humiliating our son." "Am I, Richard?" I asked, my voice dropping to an icy calm as I turned back to him. "Or am I finally telling the truth about how you and your mistress have humiliated him?" With that, I pressed the button. Behind the altar, the large screen flickered to life. But instead of happy photos, the first image to appear was a high-resolution surveillance photo of Richard and Isabella locked in a passionate kiss in his university office. The crowd erupted, gasps, shouts, people leaping to their feet to see. I saw Isabella's mother clutch her pearls, her face pale with shock. "But that's not the worst of it," I continued, my voice rising above the din. "You see, my husband's betrayal goes much, much deeper than a simple affair." The screen changed. Now it displayed bank statements. A laser pointer graphic, controlled by David, circled forged signatures on retirement fund withdrawal forms. It highlighted transfers to offshore gambling websites. It showed credit card statements with tens of thousands of dollars in charges for hotels, jewelry, and cash advances at casinos. The noise from the crowd began to die down, replaced by a stunned, horrified silence. This was no longer just a sordid drama. This was something far darker. "For 15 years, my husband has been leading a double life," I announced, my voice steady. "He has a gambling addiction that has brought our family to the brink of ruin. He has stolen our life savings to fund it. He has forged my name to do it." I turned my attention to the bride. "And his lovely fiancée, the woman about to marry my son, has been his willing accomplice." The next slide showed documents David had procured from the gallery's server. It detailed the sale of a forged painting to a shell corporation and the subsequent transfer of funds into Isabella's personal account. It showed emails between her and the forger. I saw her business partners in the audience staring at the screen, their faces contorted with rage, and then, the final, devastating blow. "But the true mastermind behind much of this ruin," I said, my voice turning to ice, "is the bride's own father." The screen now showed a detailed ledger. It was a record of Richard's debts to Mr. Vanderbilt, with handwritten notes in the margin. One note, dated 3 months ago, was circled in red. "All debts forgiven upon the successful completion of the merger." "This wedding," I declared, "was a bailout. A way for Mr. Vanderbilt to settle the massive debts my husband owed him by sacrificing his daughter and my son. This isn't a marriage, it's an acquisition." The silence that followed was absolute. 300 people stared, speechless, at the evidence of a conspiracy so cold, so calculated, so utterly devastating. And in that perfect, terrible silence, I watched the world I had built for 30 years burn to ash. The silence was shattered by a single guttural sob. It was Isabella, who stumbled backward, her face a ghostly white against her dress. Then she crumpled to the ground in a heap of silk and broken lies. That sound broke the spell. The garden exploded into utter chaos. People were shouting, pointing, pulling out their phones to film the catastrophe. Isabella's mother rushed to her side, while her father, the judge, stood frozen, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated humiliation. Richard stood for a moment, his face a whirlwind of panic, fury, and utter despair. He looked from the damning evidence on the screen to me, to the shocked faces of his colleagues and friends. He was cornered. There were no charming words, no intellectual arguments that could save him now. His meticulously crafted life had been publicly and spectacularly destroyed. Then he did the only thing a coward could do. He ran. He turned and bolted, shoving his way through the stunned guests, sending a table of champagne flutes crashing to the ground as he scrambled for the exit. He was trying to flee the wreckage of his own life, but David was waiting for him. My sister's friend, still looking like a sound tech, stepped out from behind a large magnolia tree. He was an average-sized man, but he moved with the calm assurance of his years on the police force. As Richard barreled past, David simply stuck out his foot. It was a perfectly timed, almost elegant trip. Richard went down hard, skidding across the manicured lawn in his $1,000 suit. "In a hurry, Professor?" David asked mildly, strolling over to where he lay gasping on the grass. By now, Thomas had left the altar and was standing by my side. He put a strong, steadying arm around my shoulders. Isabella was being helped to her feet by her mother, and she pointed a trembling finger at me. "You did this!" she shrieked, her voice a hysterical rasp. "You planned this all to ruin me." "No, Isabella," Thomas said, his voice cold and sharp, slicing through her tantrum. "You ruined yourself. You, him," he gestured to his father, who was now being detained by David, "and your father." "Let me go!" Richard snarled, trying to twist his arm out of David's grip. "I don't think so, Richard," David said calmly. "You see, while your gambling debts might be a civil matter, bank fraud and forgery are felonies. But don't you worry. We're not here for you today." He looked over his shoulder. "Our business is with the bride." Two uniformed police officers were making their way calmly through the parting sea of guests. They were here for Isabella. "Isabella Vanderbilt?" one of the officers asked, his voice quiet but carrying authority. Isabella's eyes widened in sheer terror. "No," she breathed. "You are under arrest for fraud and conspiracy to sell forged artwork," the officer continued, as his partner gently but firmly took her arms and clicked the handcuffs into place. The sound was sharp, final, and echoed across the silent garden. I saw Isabella's face crumble as the reality hit her. This wasn't just public shame. This wasn't just a ruined wedding. This was real. This had life-altering legal consequences. Her perfect life was over. As the police led a sobbing Isabella away, her parents could only watch, paralyzed by shock. The photographers hired for a society wedding were now capturing the public disgrace of one of the city's most prominent families, their flashes popping like fireworks. The guests began to scatter. Some fled quickly, wanting no part of the disaster. Others lingered, whispering in small, shocked groups, their phones held high to capture every last second of the drama. In the midst of the wreckage, I finally felt the strength I'd been holding on to drain away. Thomas held me up. "It's over, Mom," he whispered. "It's finally over." I looked around at the ruins of the perfect day I had so carefully planned. It was a disaster. It was a nightmare. But for the first time in over a year, I felt like I could take a full, deep breath. The hours that followed were a chaotic blur of police statements, hushed conversations, and the sad, surreal process of tearing down a wedding that never happened. Isabella was taken away, her white dress a tragic sight in the back of a police car. Richard, after being questioned, was released pending further investigation. He got in his car and drove away, not saying a single word to me or to his son. The story became a local sensation. Headlines screamed about the wedding of the year, becoming the scandal of the decade. Our faces were splashed across the news. I unplugged my phone and retreated into the quiet of my home. My little book club was my salvation, my friends forming a protective circle around me. The day after the non-wedding, I walked into my lawyer's office with the signed divorce papers and the USB drive of evidence. I filed that same afternoon. Faced with irrefutable proof of fraud, Richard didn't contest a thing. The legal proceedings were swift. In the settlement, I received the house and the entirety of what was left of our savings and investments, as restitution for the funds he had stolen. It didn't feel like a victory, just a necessary amputation. Isabella, facing a mountain of evidence, took a plea deal. She was sentenced to 18 months in a minimum security facility and ordered to pay restitution to the clients she had defrauded. Her father, Mr. Vanderbilt, was disgraced. He was forced to resign from several prestigious boards, his reputation in Charleston utterly destroyed. Richard's downfall was less public, but just as absolute. The university forced him into early retirement. He lost his reputation, his career, and the respect of everyone who had ever known him. He sold his car and moved into a small, rented condo on the other side of town. But the most unexpected part of the aftermath was Thomas. A month after the wedding, he came to me. He had made a decision. He was leaving his high-pressure residency program at the hospital. "I only did it to make him proud," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "I need to find out what I want now." He spent the next year traveling, working in clinics in South America, finding himself far away from the wreckage of his old life. He came back a different man, calmer, surer of himself, with a quiet strength I had never seen before. He ended up moving to a small town in the mountains of North Carolina and joining a family medical practice. A year passed. Life found a new, quieter rhythm. The media moved on. I sold the big family house with all its painful memories and bought a small, charming cottage closer to the sea. It was peaceful, filled with light, and it was all mine. One evening, my doorbell rang. It was Richard. I hadn't seen him since that horrible day. He looked like a ghost, thinner, grayer, the vibrant spark completely gone from his eyes. He asked if he could come in. I almost said no, but I stepped aside. He told me he was in a support group for his addiction. He told me he was finally confronting the lies he had told himself and everyone else for years. He apologized. He said he was sorry for the theft, for the affair, for the humiliation, for the life he had destroyed. I listened, and I knew he was sincere. But an apology couldn't rebuild a city after it had been burned to the ground. "I forgive you, Richard," I said, and was surprised to realize that I meant it. "Not for your sake, but for mine. I can't live with that poison inside me anymore." I looked him straight in the eye. "But we can never go back. That life is over." He nodded, tears welling in his eyes. "I know," he whispered. And then he left. That night, as I sat on my porch listening to the ocean, I thought about the woman I was a year ago, hiding behind the flowers, my world collapsing. She felt so broken, so lost. I wished I could go back and tell her that this pain was not the end. The family I thought I had was an illusion. It shattered into a million pieces. But the life I built from the shards is smaller, quieter, and imperfect. But it's honest. It's real. And for the first time in a very long time, that feels like more than enough. Thank you for listening to my story today. Your support means the world to me. If this story touched you, I hope you'll consider liking this video and subscribing to my channel. I tell a new story every single day, so please come back tomorrow and hit that notification bell so you don't miss it. And if you'd like to watch another story right now, you can click on one of the videos you see on the screen. Be well, my dears.